Okay, hi everybody. This is Mia from Travelpreneur Tribe, and we are about to start a live interview with Orin Davis, who is a scientist, consultant, and a startup advisor based here in New York. So, welcome, Orin.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So, one of the things that we're going to be talking about, that he's going to be talking about, is what are the benefits of really finding the core of the story that draws in your customers? Because a lot of times, like, we come up with like all of these ideas and have these new business ideas, but we often like get stuck on really clarifying those ideas to a point that we cannot even sell those products and services. So he's going to share some of his tips and tricks on what he's using to really clarify that, get your story out there and be heard by your customers. So Oren, before we get into like the details about, you want to tell us a little about yourself, like how you got started, how did you ended up here where you are now, and just
So mine
anything
is
you
one of
want to
those
share.
long meandering tales that started with a career. I was going to do chemistry, and in high school I was actually working in drug R&D and was going to major in chemistry. Ended up with a degree in neuroscience. Worked at Mass General doing neuroscience for a bunch of years. Moved into educational consulting. Did a PhD in positive psychology and organizational behavior. And then the startup world found me. I was actually thinking about a 100% academic career, but I did like the idea of doing some applied work because I didn't want to be locked in the ivory tower. But then, people from startups started asking me questions. I joined a startup as the chief science officer of SelfSpark, and that was kind of the first taste, and it kept on moving from there. I've been working some of the businesses I've been working with before as like a statistician were small businesses, and so I really got that taste, and it was cool. And then SelfSpark was a really amazing opportunity. Really enjoyed it. We actually closed the doors in 17, but it was still a great experience. And startups kept coming to me asking me questions, and turned out I had answers. Turned out my research in creativity, innovation, business, neuroscience, positive psychology, even chemistry, it was all coming back into play. And so here I am.
All right, nice. How long have you been doing this?
About 5 years as a startup advisor, but I started really working with companies, like even going back to grad school and even before.
Okay. So can you share some of, I guess, a little more details as to, what are some of those services and offers that you provide to the clients and companies? What are some of the benefits that they can get out of working with you?
Sure. So I work with companies of all sizes, and much of my consulting practice specifically focuses mostly on how companies can get the most out of their human capital. So a lot of startups come to me, they've got questions about hiring. A lot of large companies come to me with questions about hiring, how to make the right hire is actually one of my main lines of specialty, but also how to get employees to be more creative, innovative, how to get them more engaged. Any number of other human capital issues that come up. I get asked all sorts of HR related questions, everything from like, how to write a job description to how to handle a sexual harassment case to any number of other diversity and inclusion questions that I advise upon also. But then the other side of my work has to do with how people come up with creative ideas. And so consequently, building on that research, a lot of startups want to know what comes out of that research. So, we've got an idea for a product, and now what do we do? Or we've been building out this MVP, and now we've got the MVP, but we don't know where to take this thing because we're not sure anybody else gets it. We get it, but we don't know how to explain it to anybody else.
So tell us, how do you do it? What's the trick?
So sometimes the first trick is realizing you don't have anything. And that's often one of the hardest things for a lot of startups to swallow, is that actually you don't have anything. And you thought you did, or you made this thing, and then you realize somebody else has already done it, but you didn't really get a good look at the market. Or you realize that as much as you've invented this thing, there's really only a small group of people that are going to want it. And the number one thing is, when that happens, not to be discouraged, be prepared to pivot. Remember that a lot of great startups were pivots. Instagram was a total pivot. So, getting the right team together may be just as worthwhile for an idea. Like, you coalesced around some original idea, but then that one doesn't work, but you got an amazing team here with you. Why don't we do something else together? And sometimes that can be what happens. In other cases, how you do it is really, really understanding what this MVP or what this item is about. Like, one of the things that's pretty much one of my hallmarks is really digging down on the first principles of this. What is this really? Why does it exist? Why does it need to exist? And people sometimes, jokingly ask if my doctorate was actually in philosophy, and I say, no, it's a doctorate of philosophy in psychology. But they sometimes people say to me, like, you sound like a philosopher. Well, yes, you need a good philosophy underneath your company and
You
a
need
good
to know
culture,
your
and that's
why,
what it builds
right?
out to be. I'm sorry?
You need to know your why, basically. Like, why are you doing it, right?
Yeah.
Just gist of it. So what are some of the, do you use any tools? Like, how do you find out? So like, let's say, I'm just like starting a business, we can even take, Travelpreneur Tribe, for instance, like, what are some of the things that are must have for you to really get a clarity on your idea?
So the funny thing is, I'm actually less a fan of tools because tools indicate a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's actually not the way I do it. A lot of what I believe in is doing very bespoke things, and the whole point is the point of a startup often is that there's probably another tool out there, a one-size-fits-all tool that doesn't work. And basically what you're saying is the one-size-fits-all tool that's out there doesn't work, so maybe I should use a one-size-fits-all tool. That's not a good idea.
Yeah. Well, no, I understand. Yeah, but what do you do? I guess what are your techniques then? That differentiate you. From using some tools that help you in the process. What do you
So a
do?
lot of it is the way that I drill down and the way that I help companies make connections between both their own people, their own ideas. A lot of that, I mean, these are learnable techniques, and I do teach the different techniques. A lot of them have to do with analogical thinking or, just first principles thinking. And I mean, if you want to get to like what the models are, really those are the fundamental models, analogical thinking and first principles thinking. But it takes a lot of training to use them, and it also takes a lot of training to train others in it. But it's certainly something that people can learn, and I do teach folks how to do it. When I teach creativity courses and innovation courses in universities for MBA students, for master's students, undergrads, PhDs, um, or just workshops on that, they start learning that that there are actual techniques that you can get into and use. And it's the sort of thing where, like, just like a hammer is a pretty simple tool to use, but there's a difference between using a hammer and using it really well. Like, there's a difference between the way a layperson uses it and the way a carpenter uses it.
Yeah. So what are some of those techniques? Can you tell us some of the details? Like, let's say for the people that are gonna be, looking at this interview, and they're interested, right? They have their idea. What would be like some of the top things that you would recommend them? Oh, you really need to like do this to get clarity.
Sure. So what I'm going to introduce to you are basically the hammer and the screwdriver of your intellectual toolbox on this. So the first one is, what's called the 5 whys. And if you've ever had any kind of discussion with somebody under the age of 5 who's figured out what the word why is, you realize that everything that they say to you, they're going to say back, why? And by about the
That's
second
so
or third of
true.
those, you just want to like scream because I said so. Right? Except that, and now imagine actually having to do that about your business, only you're not allowed to scream out because I said so or anything along those lines. Right? So we've created this product. Why? Oh, for some reason that we've come up with. Why? And like, you actually got to go to 5, and you absolutely, like, this is one of those, like, no exceptions, gotta go to 5. And somewhere
Okay, the
around,
five big whys. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I say the five big whys. That's like the starting point, right?
Yeah, and somewhere around 3 or 4, like that third or fourth why, you're gonna actually, the fifth one's not so hard. Believe it or not, everybody thinks the fifth one's the hard one. It's not. It's the third or the fourth one where you just get this very frustrating block, and that's often where they bring me in, is actually helping them get past why number 3 or 4. That's the big challenge. um, because often they'll look at the first answers don't work out very well. It doesn't really dig in, and it's knowing when you need to keep digging, when you need more than 5 whys, when your why was actually a good answer, when it actually explained things. That's the sort of thing that takes experience, expertise. That's the difference between just whacking with a hammer and being precise and using it.
All right.
So the other one, along with the so that's your hammer. Your screwdriver is I have a bunch of different analogical thinking tools, but my favorite one that I love sharing with people is called the forced mashup.
The force mashup.
Yep, the forced mashup.
Okay, what is it? Let me hear it.
And so I'll tell you a story out of my classroom. So I was leading a seminar on in psychology. This is a graduate seminar, and one of my students participating in class, she's really getting stuck on what she's trying to say, and she happens to have a good theater background, so I know she's a creative, and so I did this to her on purpose. I knew she could handle it. And finally, I said to the student, fine, you know what? Stop right where you are. I want you to answer this question for me. How is your theory like a banana? No, you actually have to answer this. How is your theory like a banana? And this just stops her cold for a second. But like I said, she's used to these sorts of creative techniques, so she goes with it. And as this starts coming out, actually forcing her to think about the banana and the relationship between the banana and what she's trying to tell us actually helped her get it together. And all of a sudden the banana puns start coming out, and how appealing it all is, right? Yeah, okay. But as that came out, she started being able to talk about the banana, which is kind of the trick here, is talk about the banana. Oh, you're right, the banana makes me think of this, and it makes me think of that, and what I was trying to say is this. It helps you add a different dimension, and it forces you to look at what you're doing differently. So it throws in some novelty. It forces you to take a different pair of eyes, a different perspective on it. And the wordplay is often very useful, especially in a language with lots of wordplay. I mean, this one is not reliant upon English. And in languages that lend themselves to wordplay, which is most of them, or other forms of play, in some of the Asian languages, you can actually get both pictographic, tonal, and wordplay. So these can all add up in incredible ways just to get you seeing everything from a new perspective. And so you take any household object, anything you can come up with, for instance, you go back to the Alice in Wonderland thing. It's like, why is a raven like a writing desk? And it's like, that's kind of crazy, but there are actually a whole bunch of answers. My favorite is because Poe wrote on both. But the whole thing is like, right on is the double entendre there, right? So just grab some object like, how is my company like a Post-it note? How is my MVP like a Post-it note? How is my MVP like a pen? How is my MVP like a desk chair? It forces you to explain this in all sorts of ways, and this different perspective can help you pull out new ideas.
Okay. I don't think I would ever consider doing something like that, but if it if it makes you look from a different perspective, maybe I'll give it a try next time that I'm stuck.
Well, even when you're not stuck, it can actually take you in some really interesting directions. I'll give you a simple example, right? You run Travelpreneur, right?
Yeah.
So it happens I was just drinking from a glass. How is Travelpreneur like a drinking glass?
Like a drinking glass.
Yes, how is Travelpreneur like a drinking glass?
I guess it can be filled up with all of the ideas of starting business, communities, relationship, and it can feel like, glass is completely full. Like there's everything that you need. It's like it's right there, I guess.
All right, but I want to point out a couple things that you said, right? One is thinking of Travelpreneur as a container.
Yeah.
Right? You often frame it as a meetup, you frame it as a workshop, you frame it as a get-together, but actually it's a container, right?
It is, because it encompasses all of these various things into program, right? So yeah.
But also, you buy a drinking glass for things that you cannot usually hold in your hands, right? The drinking glass holds liquid. That's the thing that you can hold. So it contains something that's often very amorphous and very hard to get your hands around. And Travelpreneur is a place where you've got a container for how to build ideas, which is often a very amorphous construct that you cannot actually hold in your hands, that you can't really pin down. But when you get into Travelpreneur, it's contained in a way that makes it accessible and ingestible.
There you go.
So
That's
that's
definitely a different way to look at it.
but that's one. Two is a drinking glass is often something that brings people together, right? Especially when it comes to drinking alcohol, we never drink alone, right?
True.
And so, right, how is Travelpreneur like a drinking glass? You know, entrepreneurs we all got to stick together. Don't entrepreneur alone, right?
Interesting point of view, yes.
That's why it's the Travelpreneur tribe. Don't entrepreneur alone.
Yeah. Very interesting.
So you even developed a possible marketing campaign out of this. But I mean, this is a quick and dirty one because, you know,
No, yeah, I definitely I see your point. It really does, make you think in like a different way, right? Because you would never compare like, your company to like a glass, but there are ways, that you can definitely, look at it in some of the ways that you just described. So very interesting.
right, but this is like a 30-second improv, and I've got the CEO of a startup thinking about her own startup in a way that she didn't before.
Yeah. So okay, so that's the second one, and then I guess one more.
Okay, we want one more. All right, so I love brainstorming. The unfortunate part about brainstorming is that most people do it badly. And that's why everybody hates brainstorming. They really do. Like, yes, I'm like, so can we do brainstorming? And they're like, oh, no, I don't want to do that whole whiteboard thing. And then, you also hear people say they're really excited to do the whiteboard thing, but they often feel like that doesn't work, or it just seems to become a free-for-all, or, secretly a lot of people struggle with this one. And they all try to get excited, but actually, not so much. And part of the reason why, and this is like one of the deep secret tricks to brainstorming. I've actually done research on this, so I'm going to give you a little bit from, it's not my own research, but from the world of research. One of the most important tricks to brainstorming is you must come prepared. That's the trick. Because brainstorming usually skips that step, but actually the first step of brainstorming is to know what the questions are and to prepare on your own. Like, go back to wherever you are by yourself, nobody else, no discussion. Take your notes. Write things down. Think about this yourself for quite a while before you come together as a team. And then you actually have to gauge in 3 phases. It's not just, brainstorming. A lot of people think brainstorming is this free-for-all, non-judgmental episode. It's actually not. You begin with that, right? You begin with this non-judgmental free-for-all. We're not going to judge anything. We're not going to do any, cutting off, decision-making, any of that stuff. That's great. Do that. But then you have to switch to the judgment phase.
Mm-hmm.
You actually have to have a judgment phase. And everybody forgets about the judgment phase. And after that, even the, bring it down to action items phase, which is, some people consider that part of the judgment phase. But either way, right, do it by yourself. Then you get together in a non-judgmental phase. Then you move to the judgmental phase, and then from the judgments that you've made, the ideas that you like, bring this down to an implementation and an actual list of action items: who's doing what, when, how, and so on. That's the end of the brainstorming session, when everybody who's going to be involved leaves with an action item.
Okay, so top 3. All right. So when I know I'm gonna try to wrap up. We've been talking for a little bit, but just tell me. So like right now, right? You have all of these. Like you went through like all of these brainstorming sessions, and you really like validated. Like your idea, and you're ready to move forward, and you want to put it in a presentable way, right? So you want to create like that pitch deck, and you really want to uh, tell that story to others, so it really doesn't just stay a story in your head. So what are some of the tips and tricks around that to really make sure that the story that you just found like really lives on in a pitch deck form?
So there are a couple things. One of them is, once again, knowing the first principles of your company, why it exists, what the need really, really is, and like bring it down to something very basic, very fundamental that everybody can experience viscerally, right? I mean, Netflix, right? The original story of Netflix, if you look this up, it's quite an incredible story. Just, the pain of having to explain to your spouse why you're returning a video late and have to pay a lot of money. Right? And anybody who's married does not want to have to explain to their spouse that, after their spouse told them to return the video and they forgot to return the video, they're now going to have to spend a lot of money. Right? Dear spouse, I kind of forgot to do what you told me to, and this is going to cost us $25. You find me any person who thinks that that is a comfortable conversation. Right? And when you say that, it's like we all have this visceral, like, no, do not want to tell my spouse about that. Right? And that visceral thing is what can get people to buy into something. Right? So people don't go down on the visceral a lot of the time. They're just like, oh yeah, we've got this new way of doing this. Okay, what's wrong with the old way? That's another thing people don't talk about, is what's wrong with the old way.
Mm.
And as a consequence of this, one of the things that they really don't think about is how people are going to migrate from the old way to your new way. And a lot of the advice that I'm giving companies, or why I'll point out that certain companies are not going to fly, is because you didn't give the customers a path to get there. So that's another really, really big one. Besides that, getting down the story, like, you have to give the visceral, you've got to explain the why, the first principles of the company, you got to give them a path to your company, and you've got to provide some kind of ROI. You got to show them why whatever they're going to be doing to invest in your company, whether that's buying the product, buying the service, that they're actually going to end up with something that's better than what they've currently got, and that it's actually going to be worth it for them. Because especially if you're going to require some kind of migration, that's time, money, effort, and so on.
Yeah, there has to be an ROI attached to it.
There does. And the one other thing, which it amazes me how many times I've had to say this to a company, but never make it hard for your customers to pay you. And it really is amazing how many times I've seen companies actually falter because it's just too annoying to pay for this. So make it easy, as easy as possible. Don't require them to sign up. Just take their money as quickly as you can. And because many of us, one of the biggest frustrations we have is actually people telling us to wait so that we can give them money.
For the services that should be available right then and there. So yeah.
Or for services that we know we want and that we're prepared to pay for, just so like, wait, I'm here, I've got money in my hands and I am ready to give it to you. Why aren't you taking it? Can't think of too many things that turn somebody off more than that.
I know, yeah. Okay. Okay, so thank you so much, Orin, for all of your advice. I actually do have another question before we wrap it up. And I know like there's a lot of resources out there, right, that people can just find, like various, books and trainings and everything. What is one of the things that you would want to kind of point out that was very helpful for you, either personally when you were just starting your whole like entrepreneurship, or maybe like more technical books on how-tos or anything? Is there anything that you would recommend for folks to like, oh, you definitely need to check this out?
I mean, I teach this, so I've got a lot of books in the arsenal. Probably the number one book that I assign, this is actually a long list, but the number one book I probably assign is Keith Sawyer's Zigzag.
What is it? What is it about?
It's basically about the creative process and how people go through the creative process. I think it does a lot of demystification. Keith Sawyer is a professor of creativity and education. He's at UNC. Also, he's in my academic family tree, so admit to a little bias, but he's an incredible guy, and he's got really great ideas about how people can be creative. He's studied a lot of creative groups. He's really studied the process extensively over the years, and he really makes it very accessible A lot of good exercises in the book, a lot of good theory, a lot of good ways to actually upgrade your creative process. And so, like, if if you have to read only one book, I would say go for that one. And then, after that, there's just a whole lot of others that are out there that are really, really good. I mean, you can look at Drucker's books on innovation. You can look at Tina Selig's book, Ingenious, was really enjoyable. There are any number of others, Higgins, and some of those get a little bit more technical.
Yeah.
I would say also Luke Williams, his book Disrupt was really good. I've enjoyed some of Clay Christensen's work. That's a little more, it's a little, Clay Christensen's work is a little less technical, but it's also very understandable. So, he makes some great points. His Jobs to Be Done theory is really good, and I like that one. So,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
so that's the collection.
I'll put a post after we're done, and then feel free to put in one or two of your recommendations that folks can just check it out. So
Sure.
okay, well, thank you so much. It was so nice chatting with you. And oh, before we go, one last thing: where can people find you? Like, if they want to get in touch with you.
You can jump on my website. It's qllab.org. QLab.org links to all sorts of things, resources, TEDx talk, blog, consulting, startup advising, and even some of my academic papers. So anything you want to know about me is probably there.
All right, cool. Thanks you so much.
All right, thanks, Mia.
Okay, bye.